Welcome to Sib Spot. Today's Reddit stories are from MaliciousCompliance. Story 1 is by Patty Cake, with 4s for the A's. Fine then, I'll just take paternity leave. Many years ago, I was a sales manager for the now defunct Circuit City. My wife and I were expecting our first child. This was in 1999. My wife was leaving her place of employment as she was planning on staying home with our daughter once she was born. Being our first child, I wanted to be home for a little while at the beginning. As I was talking to my store manager to arrange having some time off when my daughter was born, I asked for a week off. I was met with opposition and told I could only have 2 days off because we don't have extra management coverage, yet we somehow cover people's vacation. This was absolutely ridiculous, and luckily I had done my homework. The way the FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, law is written, the parents can take up to 12 weeks of maternity or paternity leave, and their job is guaranteed to be waiting for them when they return. I believe this is meant to be combined between the parents, but since my wife was leaving her job permanently and not taking maternity leave, that left 12 weeks available for me to take. Paternity leave is rarely ever done because it's most often unpaid leave. I, however, had plenty of paid time off saved up, vacation and sick time. So I informed the store manager that I would be filing for paternity leave under FMLA and would in fact be taking 12 weeks off and would be using my PTO to cover my income. He tried to argue with me, but I told him he should probably go contact HR. He returned later that day and sheepishly asked me if I would accept the week I originally asked for. I told him that I would accept 2 weeks or 12 weeks and that the choice was his. I ended up with 2 weeks, and the store manager learned that, though I was young at the time, I wasn't going to be pushed around, and that reasonable requests should be reasonably accepted. Get 'em! Get 'em, OP! This is one of those stories where I read it and I just get giddy, because you're just sticking it to the man, for lack of a better phrase, although you're in a management position, and the man is sometimes considered the manager as well. They think they know better. They think they can just say, no, we don't have coverage, so you can't have it. But this is just another one of those examples where if you really do your research, you're armed to the teeth to get your way. Our next story is by Manbird Plain, 69420. What a great set of numbers that is. I can't use a shopping cart, but I can put some items on the checkout counter. As you wish. Some background. About a year or two ago, I did a lot of shopping at a grocery store for work. Sometimes I would need to grab items from the liquor store attached to the grocery store. The liquor store operated as its own separate little store with its own checkout, but it was still owned by the grocery store and you had to enter from the inside of the grocery store. When you enter the liquor store, there's a sign that you must leave your shopping cart outside. This normally makes sense as the liquor store is small and having people in carts all around would cause quite the traffic jam. On to the day in question. On my list for this shopping trip, I had a full load of liquor to get for the bar at work and for a holiday party. I probably needed around 15 handles of assorted booze. As I walked into the liquor store for this shopping trip, there was no one else around except for the cashier. Knowing I had a large number of items to purchase, I asked if I could bring an empty cart in and park it next to the checkout spot so I could load it with all the liquor bottles I needed to purchase. I was met with a very nasty, "No, don't you see the sign?" I tried to explain the situation and how I needed many more bottles than I could possibly carry, plus there was no handheld baskets around for me to try to manage. The cashier wasn't having it and told me if I really couldn't carry everything at once, I could place some items on the checkout counter while I went to get more. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. I only needed about 15 bottles to cover the month's supply of booze, but I figured why not go ahead and get stocked up for the next month. I spent about 15 minutes running back and forth from the shelves to the counter, placing more and more items down, taking up the whole counter. As I was doing this, a few customers came in, and I watched the cashier struggle to work around my items in order to scan and check out the other customers. The look on the cashier's face was glorious as he had to work around the problem he created for himself. When I finally did check out, the cashier didn't have enough room on the checkout counter to scan and bag my items. So get this. The cashier then told me I could bring my cart in to put the bottles in to make room on the counter. I jokingly asked if he knew the carts were prohibited in the store, but he didn't laugh at that one. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I went and got my cart anyways because it would have been a huge inconvenience to me to run back and forth from the counter to my cart. I genuinely understand the store's policy on this, but sometimes there needs to be exceptions to the rule. I agree there should be exceptions to the rule. Like, what if somebody who's disabled comes in and they need a cart to even bring one thing to the counter? Not that I do any drinking myself, but I am very aware that they're very heavy and very delicate most of the time. I think if they had some sort of store policy in place where they're like, if you're buying more than X amount of items, you can bring in a cart. Or if you have problems lifting things, you can bring in a cart. But no, not everybody should be able to. Liquor stores, if you know them, are generally pretty small, and the aisles are pretty small too. Our next story is by The Frustrated Poet. If you leave the ward, we will discharge you. This is a story from over a decade ago, which has always stuck with me, and that I was reminded of by another post here. In 2011, my darling daddy had to have surgery to remove one of his kidneys due to a large cyst. 2 days after his surgery, while he was on the ward recovering, he began to feel unwell, but thankfully it was something he was used to that could be resolved easily: heart palpitations. Now, Dad had been having heart palpitations since the mid-90s, and while it was scary in the early days, by 2011 it was a really simple routine. Go to the A&E and get an injection from the cardiac team at the hospital. Sometimes he would have a normal sinus rhythm, but would be having palpitations nonetheless, identified by the feeling in his body. The doctor on shift took an ECG and promptly informed him that he was not having a heart palpitation. He had a normal sinus rhythm. He tried to explain that he had been having palpitations for 15 years, he knows what a palpitation feels like, and that all she needed to do was call the cardiac team. This was a semi-regular occurrence, about once a year, and the heart nurses all knew him by name and loved him. He's quite a character. The doctor refused to page the cardiac team, repeating that he wasn't having palpitations. For a couple hours, Dad sat there in panic, getting more and more distressed. It was outside of visiting times, so he was alone. He told the doctor that he would make his own way to the cardiac team, and she told him, "If you leave the ward, we will consider you absconded, and we will formally discharge you." Again, this was 2 days after losing a major organ. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. Dad called 999 from his hospital bed. When they asked for his address, he said, "That's an interesting question. Normally it's X, but right now I'm on ward blank at blank hospital." Shocked, the call handler asked what happened, and Dad relayed the whole thing to them. The call handler escalated the call to a manager who asked to speak to the dad's doctor and give her a massive dressing down. Her face grayed as she realized the gravity of what was happening. She immediately arranged for a porter to take him to A&E, UK emergency room, to be assessed by the cardiac team. And what do you know? He was, in fact, having palpitations and had been for several hours. A quick injection later, his heart was back to normal, and we were all left stunned by the whole thing. I was in my 20s at the time, and my dad was my superhero, and seeing him crying in the hospital bed, looking so scared and small, will never leave me. I will never forget what that doctor did, and I'll never forgive her. She has never even apologized to him, or to us. Dad could probably have taken the hospital, the doctor, and the trust to court, but that's just not his bag, and he just let it go like water off a duck's back. 12 years later, he's healthy and happy, but I honestly thought I might lose him because of an arrogant doctor and her stubbornness. I've had palpitations in my heart from coffee consumption at times. It's not fun, and it definitely makes you... There's been some that can be quite severe, and I remember I had one while driving once and literally had to pull over because I started to feel lightheaded, but it's pretty rare. I get them maybe once every couple years. Having heart palpitations for hours is definitely not normal. I would get them for maybe at the most 10 seconds. But having them for hours, that would be really distressing and nerve-wracking. I'm glad your dad's okay, but what a horrible thing to have to get a shot to make your heart go back to normal. That's going to be quite concerning. Down in the comments by Dr. Hugh. Good on your dad. Sometimes medical professionals can be so dismissive. I had atrial fibrillation, and my cardiologist said I should call in every time I had one so I could report how long it lasted. One time I got a nurse who said I didn't have to do that. Then she said that some people don't even feel when they're in AFib. Lucky them, I guess. I could definitely feel them, and it wasn't a fun experience. I told my cardiologist about that next time we talked. He seemed surprised that a cardiac nurse would have that sort of reaction. That's it for today, guys. Until we meet again, have a beautiful day.